What happens when your mother lies to the court and tries to steal from your father? Watch how my father exposed her betrayal and won a life-changing custody battle, revealing shocking secrets about her neglect and deceit. This is a story of survival, justice, and reclaiming our future. I grew up in a small suburban neighborhood where everything seemed pretty normal at first glance. My name is Daniel, and I was just your average kid, living with my sister, Rachel, and my parents, Carol and Jeff. We had the house with the white picket fence, the kind of house that looked like it belonged in a commercial. But behind the front door, things were far from perfect. As a kid, I didn't fully understand what was happening. All I knew was that something felt off. Mom, Carol, was never around much. She always had an excuse, either working overtime or out with friends. My dad, Jeff, did most of the work around the house. He took care of the bills, the chores, and made sure Rachel and I had everything we needed. But even as a child, I could tell something wasn't right. Carol wasn't a warm figure. She never had time to sit down with us, to ask how our days were, or to give us a hug. She'd walk in, tired and irritated, demanding things from Dad. He would give them to her, because he always did, and then she'd retreat again into her own world, outside the house, with whatever new man she had met that week. Dad, on the other hand, kept his head down, focusing on us, doing his best to make up for the absence of the one person who should have been there for us. I don't think anyone truly noticed how bad it was at first. It was like this slow, creeping feeling. Every day the cracks in our family grew a little wider, but it was easy to ignore them when everything else looked perfect on the surface. But then everything started to unravel. It started with the fighting. It wasn't in front of us at first, but we could hear it late at night. The yelling, the insults, the accusations. Rachel and I would lie on our beds trying to block it out with our covers over our heads, but there was no escaping it. There was no escape from the words that would echo through the walls, words that shattered the illusion of a happy family. My dad, who had always been patient and loving, began to withdraw. He stopped talking to Carol. He stopped fighting back. The silence between them became deafening. The nights of screaming turned into weeks and then months of cold indifference. It was clear to us that something had broken between them. But even though we were children, we understood why. Dad wasn't stupid. He knew Carol had been cheating on him for years, but he never confronted her. He didn't need to. He knew. He was living with the knowledge that the woman he had married and loved had long since left him emotionally and physically for the company of men who didn't care about her kids or the family she was supposed to be looking after. But Carol didn't stop there. She wasn't just neglecting her responsibilities as a wife, she was neglecting us too. I couldn't remember the last time I had seen her make an effort to spend time with us, let alone try to connect. Rachel and I were invisible to her. It was as if we were just there to make the house look like a family, but we didn't matter. Then came the final straw. My dad, who had always been silent, had had enough. He was done being the only parent in this situation. One night, after another argument between Carol and him, he finally confronted her, but not in the way you'd expect. There were no screams or accusations, no fists were thrown. Dad, always the calm and collected man, simply asked her to leave. She didn't even fight it. That's when the truth came out. Carol had been seeing other men for years. It wasn't just a random affair here and there. She had been in multiple relationships, had abandoned us for months at a time, and it just stopped pretending to care. She had completely checked out of being a mother and a wife, and no amount of pleading, of showing her the damage she had done, was going to change that. The divorce was quick, much quicker than I thought it would be. We lived in a world where everyone thought they knew what was best for us, but we weren't even asked. The moment the divorce papers were filed, Carol didn't bother to show up. It wasn't her loss. In fact, she seemed relieved that she didn't have to deal with the consequences of her actions. But my dad, even after everything, never once bashed her in front of us. He was the one who took the high road.
Rachel and I were split between the two of them. I chose to stay with my dad. I had already felt more connected to him, and even though it was a difficult decision, it was the one that felt right. Rachel, though, stayed with Carol. I don't think she knew what else to do. It wasn't that she liked her mom more, it was just that, as a little sister, she was afraid of what would happen if she didn't. So she stayed. And I lived with the fear that our family was splitting, and that maybe, just maybe, we'd never be the same again. But then, 6 months later, the custody battle came. Carol had done something that made my blood boil. She had lied. She lied to the court, claiming that I was living with her when, in fact, I had been living with Dad for months. It wasn't just a small lie, it was a calculated move. Carol wanted that child support check. She wanted to keep up the act that she was still a mother, and she figured that lying would make her a victim, and maybe, just maybe, she could get more money out of Dad. But my sister and I weren't buying it anymore. We knew what was going on. We weren't kids anymore. We were old enough to understand the game she was playing, and we were old enough to speak the truth. When we walked into that courtroom, we knew the stakes were high. This wasn't just about who would get us. It was about our future. It was about making sure Carol couldn't keep using us. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I knew what I had to say. I had to tell the truth. I told the judge that I had been living with my father for months and that Carol had lied. I explained how bad things had been when Carol was around and how we had to rely on Dad to be the only stable person in our lives. Rachel, sitting beside me, nodded. She wasn't ready to talk about everything, but she agreed with me. Together, we refuted every lie Carol had told. She was not the victim here. She was the perpetrator of everything that had gone wrong. The judge didn't take long to make a decision. It wasn't about who was the better parent or who was more fit. It was about what was best for us, and what was best was being with the one person who had never given up on us, our Dad. We won. Carol lost. Not only did we get to live with Dad, but Carol also had to pay back every cent of that child support money she had fraudulently received. The sense of justice was overwhelming, but it wasn't just about winning the battle. It was about reclaiming our lives. After the courtroom drama settled and the dust started to clear, life didn't immediately feel perfect. It was as though the weight of everything that had happened started to hit me in waves. I had always known something was wrong with our family, but hearing the judge rule in favor of me and Rachel made everything seem so final. Dad was elated, but he kept it in check. He didn't want us to feel pressured or like we had to suddenly fix everything. He wanted to make sure we were okay, that we understood it wasn't just about the money or the house. This was about us finally taking control of our own lives. And for a while, we were okay. Things got quieter. We moved into a new place, not too far from where we used to live, but far enough that we didn't have to constantly look over our shoulders. We had our own rooms, more space, and a sense of freedom that we had never experienced before. But like anything, the silence felt both peaceful and eerie. I still wondered if Rachel ever thought about what had happened with Mom. Did she have the same doubts I did? Did she wonder what would happen if we ever saw Carol again? Dad wasn't perfect, of course. No one is. But he did everything he could to shield us from the hurt. He taught us how to budget, how to maintain a home, and how to handle life's stresses without letting them consume us. In a way, he was teaching us to be self-sufficient, to know that no matter what, we could handle anything that came our way. But there were moments when I could tell that despite all his efforts, Dad was still hurting. I remember one night, as we sat down for dinner, just the three of us, Dad looked at Rachel and me with this tired, sad look in his eyes.
It wasn't just the exhaustion from work or the stress from the battle with Carol. It was something deeper. I could see the weight of all those years of sacrifices he had made, and it was as though he was wondering if it had all been worth it. "Are you too happy?" he asked quietly as we ate our pizza. It was such a simple question, but the way he said it made me realize how much he had done for us. "I think so, Dad," I replied without hesitation. It was true. The atmosphere in our new house was different. There was peace here. There were no more arguments, no more lies. Rachel nodded too, but I could see that she was thinking hard. "I miss the old house," she said, her voice soft. "I miss how things used to be." Her words hit me hard. I didn't expect Rachel to feel that way. I always assumed she had it easier than I did, but the truth was, I had underestimated how much she had been hurt by the whole thing. I hadn't really thought about it, how, for her, everything was still very fresh. Even though she didn't talk about it much, I could see that she was struggling. Dad sighed. "I know, we all miss some parts of the old life. But you're both better off now. You don't have to worry about all the things I worried about. Just focus on being kids and growing up, okay? Let me handle the rest." And that was that. After dinner, we didn't talk much more about the past, but as I went to bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we still weren't done with Carol. Despite everything, I had a nagging feeling that she wasn't just going to disappear. 2 months later, that feeling proved true. Carol showed up at the door one evening, unannounced, with a look on her face that I can only describe as desperate. I was sitting in the living room when I heard the knock. I thought it was just one of Dad's coworkers at first, but when I opened the door, I was face to face with her.
She didn't look like the woman I remembered. She wasn't wearing the same clothes or makeup that she always used to wear. There was a certain vulnerability about her now, like she was someone who had been stripped of all their defenses. "Daniel, can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice low and shaky. I wanted to slam the door in her face. I wanted to yell at her for all the pain she had caused, for the years of emotional neglect she had put us through. But instead I stood there, frozen. "I know you don't want to see me," she continued, her voice wavering, "but I need your help." At that moment, I saw it for what it really was. This wasn't about reconciliation. It wasn't about making amends. This was Carol, once again, trying to play the victim, trying to get something from us. "Help with what?" I asked, my voice cold. I've fallen on hard times. I don't have anyone else to turn to." My heart didn't soften. Not after everything. Not after all the years of lies and abuse. "That's not our problem, Mom," I said, finally finding my voice. Her face fell. "Daniel, I know I've made mistakes. I've hurt you. I've hurt your sister, but I'm asking for your forgiveness. I need help. I'm not asking for money. I don't know where else to go. Where were you all these years? Where were you when we needed you? You were never there for us, and now you want our help?" I could see her trying to hold back tears, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to fall for her manipulative tactics again. "I've been alone, Daniel. It's been hard. I just want a chance to make things right."
I shook my head, stepping back. "You've had your chance. You don't get to come back into our lives now and pretend everything is fine." Before she could say another word, Dad appeared behind me. I had no idea he was standing there, but when I looked up, he was watching us, his expression unreadable. "Carol, this is done," he said, his voice firm but calm. "You had your chance. You chose to leave, and now you'll deal with the consequences. I've raised these kids on my own, and I don't need you coming back into our lives to stir things up." Carol didn't say anything more. She just stood there, looking at us, almost as if she was waiting for us to change our minds. But we didn't. And finally, after a long silence, she turned and walked away. It was a strange moment, really. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered everything she had done to us, and that feeling quickly vanished. Things went back to normal after that. Life with Dad was peaceful again. Rachel and I spent more time together, and we focused on building our lives without Carol hanging over us. But I couldn't help but think about what Carol's visit meant. I knew she wouldn't stop trying to manipulate us. She didn't care about us. She cared about herself. But we had learned our lesson. We knew that despite the past, we had to be strong for our own sake and not let anyone, including her, drag us back into the chaos. As time went on, life with Dad became more stable. We had learned to navigate the rhythms of our new life without the constant fear and tension that had plagued us for so long. Rachel had begun to open up more, and though she still carried the weight of what had happened, I could see her healing. Dad, too, seemed to be in a better place. But there were moments, small, subtle moments, when the cracks of the past would resurface. We all carried the scars, whether we wanted to admit it or not. We had learned to live with them. But Carol's visit, her sudden appearance at our door after all those years, brought something to the surface that we thought was buried. It stirred up emotions and questions that none of us were ready to face. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was the emotional cost. The years we had lost, the trust that had been broken, the childhood memories that had been overshadowed by the chaos she brought into our lives. We would never be able to recover those years, no matter how hard we tried, but we had to find a way to move forward. I couldn't help but think about Carol's words when she said she was alone. Alone. I wasn't sure I felt sorry for her. She had made her own choices, but I couldn't ignore the fact that she seemed to have nothing left. What was it that made someone so determined to destroy their family? Was it just selfishness, or something deeper? I wondered if Carol would ever truly understand the damage she had caused, or if she would forever remain trapped in her own web of lies. Weeks went by, and eventually, Rachel and I found ourselves talking about Carol again. It wasn't often, but every once in a while, we would exchange a few words trying to make sense of everything. Sometimes we would talk about the things we wished we could change, how we could have had a different mother, how we could have had a normal childhood, or how things could have been better if she hadn't been so selfish. But those conversations were always short-lived. They never lasted long because we both knew that there was no point in going over it again and again. We had to accept the past, but we didn't have to live in it. One afternoon while Rachel was at work, I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting through some old boxes of things we had packed when we moved. Most of it was junk, old clothes, forgotten toys, and photographs that had been left behind. As I went through it, I came across a small, worn-out notebook. It was a diary. But not just any diary. It was Carol's.
I didn't know why I opened it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that small part of me that still wondered who she really was beneath all the anger and resentment. As I flipped through the pages, I was struck by how much of it was just empty. There were random thoughts, vague reflections, and words that seemed disconnected from anything real. But then, toward the end, I found something that stood out. The words were almost jumbled, rushed, as though written in a moment of panic. She had been talking about Dad. Her anger at him was palpable, and in a way it felt as if she was almost justifying her actions. She blamed him for everything. She blamed him for not being the perfect husband, for not understanding her needs, for making her feel alone. And that, in her mind, had justified everything she had done. I read it all in one sitting, unable to put the diary down. The realization hit me hard. Carol hadn't been the victim she tried to paint herself as. She had been lost in her own self-pity, justifying her mistakes, never once acknowledging the pain she had caused anyone else. The final pages were filled with tears, literal tears that stained the paper, blurring some of her words. She had been drowning in her own misery, and rather than face her problems, she chose to drag us all into it with her. I couldn't help but feel disgusted, but at the same time I understood something. This wasn't just about what she did to us, it was about what she had done to herself. She had convinced herself that she was justified, that her mistakes weren't her fault, and for years we had all been victims of that mindset. But then, as I sat there holding the diary, something shifted inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even confused. I felt free. Carol wasn't going to win. She wasn't going to control my life any longer. She had spent years manipulating us, but now it was over. She wasn't a threat anymore. Not to me, not to Rachel, not to Dad. I closed the diary and put it back in the box. It was a reminder, not just of her mistakes, but of how far we had come. We weren't those scared kids anymore. We had been through hell, and we had survived. More than that, we had built something better. We had each other, we had Dad, and we had our own future. That evening after Rachel came home, I sat down with her and told her about the diary. I didn't need to go into details. We didn't need to keep rehashing the past, but I told her what I had realized, that we didn't need to seek closure from Carol anymore. We had already closed that chapter. I think I'm finally at peace with it, I told Rachel. I think I'm ready to move forward without her hanging over us. She looked at me, her eyes thoughtful. I think I am too, she said quietly. It's like a weight has been lifted. And it had been. We didn't need Carol's approval or her validation. We had our own lives, our own identities, and we were stronger because of everything we had been through. Dad was still in a better place. He was still the same man, strong, steady, and always looking out for us, but he was more at peace. He had finally let go of the guilt that he had carried for so long. He had done the best he could for us, and now it was time for us to move on with our lives. The following months were marked by a quiet happiness. We spent more time together, enjoying the simple things. We went on trips, we celebrated holidays with joy instead of dread, and we created new memories that would define our future, not the painful past we had survived. I never heard from Carol again. She didn't come back. I don't know what happened to her. Maybe she finally faced the consequences of her actions, or maybe she continued to live in the bubble she had created for herself. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. We were free. And that was all that mattered.
If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, subscribe for more, and share it with someone who'd appreciate it. Thanks for watching.